My name's Chris Beary. I grew up on Verona Napoleon, uptown. Lived in New Orleans my whole life.
Yeah. In your household as a child, was music prevalent? Was it your parents very big music fans?
My dad in particular.
Yeah.
Very big music fan. Music was always on all the time.
What kind of music was he listening to?
The Beatles are the main thing that comes to mind.
Yeah.
A lot of Allman Brothers. Yellow Submarine was one of my kid playing songs.
Sure.
You know?
That's good. Were there any local influences that they were fans of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they would take me to see music in parks and festivals and things of that nature all the time.
Okay. And this is how old?
One.
Really?
You know,
okay. So you grew up around it.
Yeah. Grew up around it. Grew up going to the Jazz Fest when it was just a small little festival or fair.
Sure.
And other parks, you know, bands playing in the park and fairs. A lot of outdoor music happening at that time.
Yeah. Were you aware, I guess, or how soon were you aware that local music was prevalent, not just like there was a separation between the two? In other words, Yellow Submarine was somewhere else, but we had our own style of music and we had our own musicians living in the area. How old were you when you realized?
I would say it was a process, right? I can remember having a small little transistor radio next to my bed. It was an AM radio as a young kid. And listening to the disc jockeys talk about music and not having any appreciation of the fact that the disc jockeys were local, but the musicians were not, right?
Okay.
So, and I know that as a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, I didn't really have an understanding that the bands weren't all in New Orleans. You know, I think as a kid, you grow up with the idea that the world all revolves around you.
Sure.
So I'm thinking that the Beatles, you know, live down the street, or the Allman Brothers, or something like that. You know, everybody on the radio is local, literally. You know, like somewhere in the neighborhood. And I guess I started to realize that that wasn't the case when I started to ride my bike and had a little freedom, so, you know, to go out ride my bike without my parents. And that was probably when I was about 12, maybe 11, 12.
Yeah.
I was able to go further than just in the neighborhood. And I started exploring. Some friends of mine and I would go over to Tulane, used to have big concerts out in the quad on Friday afternoons, just about every Friday afternoon back then. And Jimmy used to have all ages shows where you could go on Saturday. And I think that what Jimmy was doing was he would have the band that was going to play on Saturday night do a sound check and play in the afternoon for kids. And that's when I started to realize that we had a local music scene and that those musicians were different than the musicians that you were hearing on the radio or the mainstream records you were getting at the record store.
Sure. Obviously, looking at your career, music has influenced you greatly. Did the idea that we had our own local musicians kind of compound your love for music at that age?
I think so. I mean, being able to see live music is such a different experience than listening to it. I love listening to music, whether it's on my headphones or on a record player or however. But seeing live music and live music performance and the improvisation that comes along with it is just fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that at a young age, I didn't understand the nature of improvisational music, and I didn't understand the adrenaline of the live music performance.
Sure.
But I did understand it innately. Like, I would ride my bike, 3 miles to go see a live music performance because I liked the experience of it, but I couldn't articulate what it was, about it per se.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could break it down into words aptly enough to convey that feeling to someone else. It's the one thing that gives me chills.
Yeah.
Still to this day. Did your parents play any musical instruments? Were there anybody in your family that was playing musical instruments?
No. Not a musical, not a performing family at all.
Okay, just fans.
Yeah, just fans.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
Matter of fact, I need to turn my off too. Okay. So you're getting to see live shows at Jimmy's at a young age,
Right.
And you're getting to, I guess, acquaint yourself with the idea that there's a local scene.
Right.
And at what point, I know this is much further down the road, or maybe you had an inspiration early on, I'm not sure, but at what point did you see yourself getting involved personally with any aspect or element of the local music scene?
Well, I would say that as I was in high school, I started to really enjoy going to see live music. And in college, I explored live music. And it just became something that grew more and more, right? And as I started to peel back the onion of experiencing music at a different level, I wanted to add things to it. So I started going and seeing different bands on more than one occasion. And sometime early on, when I started going to see live music, it was just to see live music. It wasn't to see a particular band. At some point that changed. I started knowing the bands that were playing, started following where they were going to be, when they were playing, and trying to make it to certain gigs to see certain bands.
Sure.
Still going to clubs where I like just the atmosphere, like Benny's, on Valley Street, but to see the particular band. And then at some point, that evolved into wanting to get expressive about it and almost try to help spread the word about it.
Okay.
And the first main thing that I did in that regard was to build the Funky Tux in 2004. And that was the idea that funk music, not just New Orleans funk music, but funk music in general, something that I'm just naturally drawn to.
Okay.
And I love it so much that I wanted to celebrate it. And when we were thinking about what type of theme to put on a float for Mardi Gras, naturally funk came up. And the idea to do, we're in the crew of Tux, the idea to do a funky Tux was what we came up with. And from there, it's just been deeper and deeper and deeper into getting to know musicians, getting to know clubs, getting to work in the space itself.
Now, if we could back it up for a second, this is quite a long span of time between your growing love for music in college and starting Funky Tux and incorporating local elements of music into it. In the midst of that, how did you? For some people, they have a natural ability to play the drums or something. So, or they like booking bands or something like that. So they see themselves a way into this machine, but for yourself, it took a little bit longer because you were earning degrees. You became a lawyer and a CPA. And what were you doing in the meantime? Did you just still consider yourself a passionate music fan, or did you always want to see yourself further into behind the scenes of music, if you will?
Well, a couple things. One, I'd have loved to have been in a band, if at all possible. My dad owned La Casa downtown in Decatur in Toulouse in the 70s when I was about 11, 12 years old. And he had live bands play there. And when I would spend the night there, I'd go downstairs in the morning in between the, bar closes at 6 a.m. and reopens at 11, turn the jukebox on and play the drum set that was backline there.
Okay.
To the drum, to the music. And when I was 17, my parents got me a drum set, or 16, my parents got me a drum set. I love playing the drums, but never got lessons and never was good enough. I didn't even really try to be in a band, but never really was good enough, I don't think, to be in a band. But I do have that natural inclination to want to be part of the music.
Sure.
And I think you get that experience when you're part of the live music.
It pulls you in.
Particularly growing up in the era of punk, where you had that crowd experience, whether you were slam dancing or not. You had that energetic crowd experience that was going on in that punk genre that really was electric. Drew you in.
Yeah.
I'm an entrepreneur and have been my whole life, and that was my natural inclination is to be an entrepreneur. Even as a little kid, I played music for parties and charged people, I think it was $60 for two of us to go with tape decks and a mixer and play music at parties. As I got out of law school and was a CPA, started working, I ventured into business. Real estate was first stuff I did. I got into restaurant, bar business, and ended up buying Jimmy's from Jimmy in 1998 or 1999. That was my first sort of foray into the music business.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
right.
and had no idea what I was doing, and I wasn't managing the club. My partner Scott was managing the club, and he had no idea what he was doing either. And Jimmy did a really good job of trying to teach us, but it was in a day and time, the late '90s, where live music in New Orleans was not what it is right now.
Right.
People were not going to see live music the way that they were, and they certainly weren't frequenting Jimmy's the way that they had been historically. And so we realized pretty early on that there wasn't a whole lot of money to be made in the live music business, and we ended up converting the club to a more of a dance club for college kids. Audubon Tavern had just closed, and we took over that kind of theme and converted it, and then ended up selling it. So I only had it for a couple of years, but it was interesting, you know, to learn a little bit about the business. I learned enough about it to know that we couldn't make much money in it.
Right.
I didn't want to be in it. Ever since then, I've never looked at the music business as something to make money at. Anything that I've done in the music business since then has all been charitable. And maybe, you know, I'd never thought about it, but maybe that Jimmy's experience was part of it. And I think the other part of it is I've just over the years gained an appreciation for musicians and gig workers, and that is the lifestyle that they voluntarily live.
Accept, yeah.
Yeah, they accept a lifestyle because they're committed to their profession and they're committed to their art. That they don't live a life that most of us have. They don't have a paycheck. They don't have life insurance. They don't have health insurance. They don't have dental insurance. Lots of times they're driving beat up cars that break down all the time. They don't work the regular hours that we work. It's hard for them to have a family in the type of style that a lot of people, you know, normally have families. Wake up in the morning, eat breakfast with your kids, that kind of thing, because they're out late, they're working, etc. And the more I've gotten to know musicians and gig workers, the more I've felt like there needs to be two things. One, immediate support for them because they are such an integral part of our life in New Orleans, that there needs to be more conscious effort to support their life any way that we possibly can. And then secondarily, I feel like people systemically, we need to work to change how musicians and gig workers are treated economically, so that we value them financially at the same level that we value them spiritually or artistically.
Sure.
And so I've devoted a bunch of my life now to trying to do both of those things.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny, if you go back to the Renaissance era, people in the creative arts were kind of revered. They had their own space in their, I guess, local area where they were kind of put up on a pedestal.
Right.
And they weren't burdened with the day-to-day, I guess, trying to make ends meet, you know.